Thank you. Hey, greetings, everyone. It's Naomi Wolf, and I have yet another hero slash heroine. This heroine is actually archetypal in my view, and that's Alexandra Latypova, or Sasha Latypova, the author of Due Diligence and Art, one of the most moving and beautiful and important Substacks on Substack. Welcome, Sasha Latypova.
Hi, Naomi. Great to talk to you again.
Great to have you. And for those of you who are less familiar with Sasha Latypova's background, she spent 25 years in pharma research, and she is now this extraordinary writer and beautiful visual artist. And I don't like most visual artists these days, so that's saying quite a lot. And she's been one of the most steadfast and dedicated voices for, I'm not even going to say health freedom, because to me it's so much bigger than that. She's been one of the most steadfast and dedicated voices for, humane values and human decency in this whole crisis of the last 5 years. So having said that, just before we jump in, I want to strongly urge you to go to her Substack and support it. This is one of those voices that absolutely we can't do without. And she's broken story after story since she sort of appeared in the health freedom space and now the general kind of commentary space as a really extraordinary researcher. Nothing gets past her. She sees patterns no one else can see. And she's calling our attention to a really important pattern right now. So let's jump right in. Miscarriages are in the news again. Makes you want to tear your hair out because we've both been working on this forever, but you really were ahead of the pack with a documentation that you published 2 years ago having to do with a whole different data set than the data sets with which I'm familiar, and that's the vSafe database. Do you want to just jump right in and tell people what you found?
Right. So vSafe database, just so those who don't know where it came from, it was part of what HHS, FDA, CDC promised to the public to collect in clinical trials of the original Pfizer and Moderna COVID shots. And so those are the trials that were going on in 2020. And every participant in that trial received an app, which was called vSafe, where they were supposed to submit, and this was like voluntary, submit your adverse events information into the app. And it was also capturing, even though the pregnancy was an exclusion criteria from these clinical trials, and it was actually pretty severe.
What does that mean? Sorry to interrupt, but what does that mean, an exclusion criteria?
So for clinical trials, they always specify inclusion and exclusion criteria in the protocol. Inclusion means we want to enroll these types of people, with these characteristics of age, demographics, health status, so forth. And then exclusion is, these are the ones that we definitely don't want to include. And
gotcha. Thank you.
Yeah, and usually it's, they're pretty extensive, both categories. And for these clinical trials, as is normal for any new technology, the pregnancy was very strictly supposed to be excluded. So they were requiring people who were, even men and women, to abstain from sex, to have 2 types of contraception, to not be planning to have children for women of childbearing potential. So it was very, very carefully specified how they should be completely excluded. Yet somehow, miraculously, in the entire Pfizer clinical trial, there were 3,500 pregnant women showed up, even though it was completely excluded. So 3,500 pregnant women, they received this vSafe app, just like all participants. And out of those 3,500, something like over 1,000 or 1,200 total numbers submitted their results for pregnancy, outcomes for pregnancy, of which about 800 women were included in the study that was official paper published based on vSafe data for pregnancy outcomes by Shimabukuro and colleagues. And this was a big, big paper in New England Journal of Medicine, very prestigious. They published a paper based on these 800 women, vSafe data, and they said totally no problem for pregnancy, no increase in miscarriage, no nothing. Several of us commented on that paper, and I read the paper, and the paper was completely misleading and actually fraudulently constructed. That whole calculation was fraudulently constructed, and it was easy to deconstruct it and use correct math and calculate the true miscarriage rates from that data, from the same data that they provided in that paper. And that's what I published 2 years ago. And that data set shows very clearly, if you use correct denominators to calculate the miscarriage rate, that miscarriage rate was over 80%. And in addition to that, there's also, so miscarriage is losing pregnancy before 20 weeks of gestation.
Mm-hmm.
And after 20 weeks of gestation, if the pregnancy is lost and the baby died, it's called stillbirth.
Right.
So from the same data set, it's also evident that stillbirth rates went up about 300%. So triple.
300%.
300%, yeah, increase.
God. So this is, pretty shocking, of course. And I really want to stress, those of you who have sort of heard me try to kind of grab the world by the ears for the last couple of years and say, look at what's in this data set over here, the Pfizer documents. Dr. Sasha Latypova is bringing up a whole other research set of data points, right? Mm-hmm. She's talking about vSafe data, which was then used to create what she calls a fraudulent, I totally agree with you, by the way, kind of gold standard, conclusion by Shimabukuro and colleagues, which is referenced all over the place, was referenced by the CDC. Everyone who was a spokesmodel drew upon it. And so Sasha Latypova is saying the math they used is fraudulent, and that by doing correct math, she's seeing the same thing that we saw, which is this catastrophic miscarriage rate. And the reason I'm stressing this is that in journalism, when you have two independent sources and two independent researchers who reach the same conclusion, that is more than a red flag. That's a fact. That enters into the realm of fact and also the realm of news, because you can't just write it off as one blip, one data set, faulty methodology, whatever. So let me now go back to you, Sasha Latypova, and say, what is it that Shimabukuro and his colleagues did with the math and the data that you didn't do that allowed them to reach this nonsensical conclusion saying everything is fine?
Right. Yeah. So they took 827 women that the data that they had, and out of the 827 women, 700 were injected in the third trimester of pregnancy, so after 20 weeks of gestation, right? And then to calculate the miscarriage rate, which is before 20 weeks, they included the 700 women into the data, right? So, but you can't have a miscarriage after 20 weeks of gestation.
It's a stillbirth. Did they count the stillbirths?
No, they did not count stillbirths, or didn't provide any statistic for that. Now they also somehow, so that's how they came up with the claim that the miscarriage is not increased, because they artificially increased the denominator by including subjects that were irrelevant for the miscarriage. They are already after 20 weeks.
Unbelievable.
So that makes the denominator so much higher. But now, if you looked only at the women who received the injection in the first and second trimester and then miscarried, it was something like 104 out of 127.
No.
Yeah.
Oh my God.
Yeah. And that gives you 82% or so.
Oh my God. Oh my God. Oh my God.
But this is, and it was a blatant, obvious lie. And it was obvious because you could go now everywhere in the abstract, in the title, in the conclusions and discussion, they always talk about it's not increased, it's totally normal, it's compared to normal background rate. Right. And then the only place where this math comes out and it's evident is in one of the tables and in the footnotes to the table. So somebody had to skip through all of that, go to the table, go to the footnotes, and then do this calculation. Right? And several of us did independently, actually. Several people. Yeah.
Literally unbelievable. Sorry, Sasha?
this is how propaganda is made. This is how they hide it. They hire these prestigious people, authors. There were, I don't know, 40 authors on that paper. It was incredible. It was a New England Journal of Medicine, and then every newspaper picks up that headline. Then we get labeled as conspiracies and crazies and anti-vaxxers, while we're just pointing to here, like 1 + 1 doesn't equal 10, it equals 2, okay? And it's just basic.
Hideous. And I can't tell you, I'm sure this has happened to you too. I can't tell you how many times when I try to bring forward the over 80% that we found in a separate data set, people will push back at me by citing Shimabukuro and saying, look, they say it's perfectly fine. And the spokesmodels on X and on all the social media, the influencers who were, underwritten by pharma or by the Biden administration, all used that study to say you are insane if you try to raise an alarm about miscarriages. Look, everything is fine. That is really evil. And may I just say that way of faking the data, creating fake categories or wordplay that, hides numbers or hiding the truth in a footnote is something that we've seen, again, in the separate data set over and over. That's the bad math and the bad faith science of these evil people in multiple venues. So I'm just validating that, you're not seeing something they don't use as a tactic in other places. You're seeing something they figured out. Yeah.
Oh yeah, it's a practice. It's a totally standard operating procedure for these people to do it this way. And also, in addition to this, the Shimabukuro in the authors, when they published this New England Journal of Medicine big paper, they said it's preliminary data.
Oh,
and
interesting.
We're still waiting for the additional. There was additional, I don't know, 1,200 subjects or so that they needed to get from the vSafe database. That data became available, and Shimabukuro and authors lost interest in publishing.
Wow. Have you looked at the data that became available eventually?
No, I know it's FOIA'd. It's been FOIA'd by Aaron Siri, and it's been published. But I personally, I don't have capacity to reanalyze the very large data sets like this. That requires specialist tools and database tools, and I got what I needed out of this. And also, I did the review of the preclinical data for both Pfizer and Moderna. And Moderna, actually, nobody else other than me that I know of has ever read that publication.
That's true. We didn't get to the Moderna data. Our project disbanded before they could analyze it. Go ahead, tell us what you found.
Right. So the Moderna data, that was very interesting. So it's not actually even the data. It's documentation. Preclinical package that Moderna submitted to FDA as part of their, again, original EUA for their product in 2020. And that was FOIA'd by Judicial Watch. And this documentation was given to me originally by the journalist who writes for them on these topics. And he wanted my opinion as a pharma developer of what was in that documentation. The documentation was about 700 pages long. It was nonsense. I've never seen anything so bad. My jaw was on the floor, and I was fairly early on in my sort of discovery and research on this. And I just could not reconcile how this garbage, excuse my language, can be used by a pharmaceutical company with a straight face, with FDA, to get anything approved. Much less something that would be pushed on everyone. It was so the problem with it was most of it, about 500 pages out of 700 pages, was one study that was conducted in 2017 on a completely different product.
I can't stand it.
It was copied multiple times. It was multiple versions put together to beef up the number of pages with this irrelevant study. But it was a biodistribution study, and there was no other biodistribution studies done on this process. So they were using this as a biodistribution. It was bad. The results of it were bad. It was biodistributing everywhere. It was going into all organs, just as with Pfizer. But again, irrelevant previous product that was never approved for anything. It failed in clinical development, but they're using it to approve this one now.
Unbelievable.
In the other 200 pages of that was, again, multiple copies of multiple versions of non-good clinical practices, no good laboratory practices, just random experiments. Again, majority of them were for different products, not the Spikevax. And there was one reproductive toxicology study done, which was required from Moderna by their DoD contract, and there was not they didn't include the full report. They said we're still working on it, but here's a little blurb, a summary of the result. And in the summary, they said we had statistically significant increase in skeletal malformation of the babies.
Right. You broke that story, I remember. Yeah.
Right. And they provided even numbers how statistically significant. And that's a major marker for fetal abnormalities and maternal abnormalities. Also, the mothers, the pregnant rats were sick, were losing hair and not eating. And like for rat to stop eating, rat is dying. Okay. So, and so it was horrible toxicities in mothers, skeletal abnormalities in babies, and they submitted it to the FDA. So the FDA had it in their possession when they issued the EUA. To date, the FDA label says there are no statistically significant skeletal abnormalities found in this.
Oh my God. Sasha, what you're saying is so important, and we've got a lot of people listening, and they're saying, listening carefully, they're reacting with horror. I want to ask you, because what you're saying is so critical and your brain is so gigantic, could you just slow it down a little bit? And also, if you bring up something with an acronym like DoD or EUA, just do us lay people a little bit of a favor and say, Emergency Use Authorization, Department of Defense. We're racing to keep up with you. Okay.
Right. Okay. Sorry, I get excited.
No, as you should. I mean, you're a very rare person. I mean, you have 25 years of understanding what you're looking at with these documents, and you've had the courage to kind of cross over to the side of letting humanity know what these dangers are. Probably a great risk to yourself. I don't to this day kind of know how you manage it, but what you're saying is incredibly important, and we're all kind of hanging on every word. So let me restate, kind of from my much lesser expertise, what I think is critical about what you just said. You said that the Moderna documents are a mess. And I just want to, again, validate that. We were supposed to have a Moderna documents book, and we couldn't do it because the initial release was so messy and catastrophic. No one could. It was like they dumped it in kind of research garbage, right? That you couldn't lift out any sense. It was like they put it in a blender, and no one could make sense of it. And then you said that nonetheless, you could see that they submitted an old irrelevant study, and that the studies they submitted related to this product in pregnancy, it caused skeletal malformations in the mice. And I remember that vividly. I remember pictures. Weren't there pictures of the skeletal malformations in the mice? And that the mother mice or mother rats got sick. Pregnant rats got sick, stopped eating, and you point out that when mother rats stop eating, or when rats stop eating, they're dying. I used to have a pet rat. I know you're right. It takes a lot for a rat not to eat. I mean, that's a tiny little anecdote, but I'm relating to what you're saying. So basically, skipping ahead, the FDA had this in their custody. They have it in their custody. They know that mammals who are pregnant will get sick to death, and their babies will have skeletal malformations. They're lying about it to this day. And they just, the brand new rebranded, our friends HHS has just announced that they're taking this injection away from pregnant women. But in fact, as you and Shannon Joy and Dr. Mary Talley Bowden shared in our conversation on Friday, they're still making it available for injection to pregnant women. Is that not correct, Sasha?
Yeah, this is correct. In fact, in the new, brand new FDA policy published by Dr. Macquarie and Prasad in New England Journal of Medicine, just about a couple of weeks ago, they published it, brand new MAGA policy. We're going to restrict mRNA shots only to unhealthy people, targeted protection. Okay, so in that policy, if you read it, it says the studies, the new versions of the product of these new mRNA shots will be approved without placebo-controlled trials, only based on immunogenicity testing. They will be approved for people who are 65 and older, regardless of health status. And in addition to that, to the category of the vulnerable that they describe. And then there's a table for the vulnerable, which includes all pregnant women and all women who were recently pregnant.
All women who are recently pregnant?
Yes, which means pregnant and breastfeeding women.
And breastfeeding.
Yeah.
So it's just a lie. It's a gigantic lie from the top of the MAGA pyramid.
Yeah.
From the people who are supposed to save us from this.
Yeah. And by the way, what I recently discovered, because just a couple of days ago, new Moderna shot was approved. New mNEX spike. It's called mNEX spike. It's a shot. It's a slightly different chemical composition. I'm not going to get into it. But anyway, so it was approved based only, and I briefly reviewed the study. There isn't enough information available for it yet. But the study design there was no placebo control at all.
That's not a study. How is that a study?
Yeah, I should ask Dr. Makary and Dr. Prasad to comment on this. Please come out and comment on how this is a study, okay? And then, so it was without placebo control. It was only testing immunogenicity. They said, oh, it's safe, but I haven't seen the data, so I can't verify that. And so this is now approved for 65 and over and all these so-called vulnerable categories, including pregnant women. By the way, this was the study was designed by Moderna in April 2023 under Biden administration, and the old FDA, bad FDA, not the good FDA that we have now, bad FDA designed that, helped them design that study, gave them the guidance of what's going to be acceptable in 2025 when they go for an approval, and perfect match. They predicted the future. Okay, so that's what I'm saying. This new good FDA policy is an old Biden FDA policy that is now we bearing fruit.
So under the Biden administration years ago, they said in 2025 there's going to be a rollout of a new Moderna COVID injection, and you're going to use it for pregnant women. Is that what you're saying?
Well, so what happens in the FDA process with the pharmaceutical manufacturer needs a lot of time to design a large study like this. The study was in something like 11,000 people, so it's huge. Over 230 clinical sites. It takes at least a year to design a study like this, and often 2 to 3 years to design a study like this, and then to conduct it, even if it's only a short-term study. So Moderna went to the FDA in 2023, according to clinicaltrials.gov. This is when the study is first registered. So they went to the FDA, and the FDA gives guidance to the manufacturer of what's going to be acceptable to the FDA as far as study design and endpoints and how it's going to be conducted. So what I'm saying, evidenced from this being fully approved now, and the study having been designed in 23, according to the same protocol, it means that the FDA told them at that time that this is going to be acceptable.
Oh my God.
So my conclusion...
Wait, so what you're saying, let me just try to tease out what you're saying a little bit. It looks like there's a blueprint that's been architected, that was architected in one administration, and they're simply executing it in a whole new the good FDA is just executing what the bad FDA laid out a few years ago. Is that what you're saying, Sasha?
Yes, exactly. So Makary and Prasad had nothing to do with this guidance. They just put their names on it. The guidance was there under Peter Marks and Robert Califf.
So it's like we changed the channel, but it's the same program.
It's the same program. Yeah. The new anchor.
Unbelievable. Well, let me go into, you saying they created a table of the vulnerable, and it's called focused protection, or they're lifting.
The language that they're using is basically, well, healthy people may not need it, or healthy children may not need it.
Mm-hmm.
But the unhealthy ones, need to be protected. And so therefore, these brand new shots without placebo testing,
Mm-hmm.
and only based on immunogenicity, meaning just testing antibodies,
Mm-hmm.
are going to be made available to all these vulnerable categories.
Right. And the vulnerable categories include pregnant women and unhealthy children, which, as we've discussed, is most of the children in America, per RFK Jr., by the way, right? So a child with allergies, asthma, we talked about this on Friday, a child who's overweight. These are all vulnerable children now who are recommended to get the shot by the brand new good HHS. That's the bottom line, right, Sasha?
Exactly.
Okay.
And another thing that people need to realize, it's not just the CDC and HHS, they always have an out for themselves. They always say,
you just slow down a tiny bit so everyone can follow your complex thought process.
So what happens most of the time with these vaccine recommendations,
Mm-hmm.
the HHS and CDC have an out for themselves. They're
Mm-hmm.
saying, we just recommend, we
Right.
don't force anyone.
Right.
Then what happens after CDC recommends something? Let's say they said vulnerable children, meaning overweight children, should get this shot.
Mm-hmm.
But it's just recommendation, and it should be a shared decision. You should discuss it with your doctor. What happens then? HHS pays the doctors, the school, and the federal government pays the schools and the states and the school districts, and everyone gets huge amounts of money to now propagate this recommendation. Now, what happens if you give people a lot of money and a recommendation? That recommendation gets executed very
Absolutely.
well.
Without question. Well, you've explained so much, and that's why you're such an extraordinary mind, is you don't just look at the policy, you look at the money flow, you look at the politics as well. Wow. So it's almost more evil, right? It's the exact same genocidal set of policies put in place by the genocidal bad guys that we just deposed. But the good guys that we fought so hard to elect are saying we've exempted pregnant women, we've taken it off, we've stopped recommending it for healthy kids, and all the influencers are going, yay, white knight. But in fact, they're just putting in a new wrapping over something that's just as genocidal and deadly. So let's now, I want to go a little bit into your kind of, I don't want to say your ancestry, but where you come from. Okay. And what I mean is, and what you see in these categories. What I mean by that is I wrote a Substack a couple of years ago, noticing that a lot of medical freedom fighters came from people who had genocide in their living memory, or a couple of generations back, and I believe that you've had direct experience of communism, right? I think we talked about that. Right. So you're intimately familiar with the genocides of the mid-20th century and with kind of genocidal totalitarian regimes. So I was struck that you're the first person to say, I mean, I was thinking it, but you're the first person to say it, and you said it in more detail, that the categories that they're carving out really map to kind of Nazi eugenics categories. And I thoroughly agree with you, as someone who's closely studied the Nazi doctors in the early 30s and eugenic policy. They're carving out, and I don't want to put words in your mouth, but as I recall what you were saying, and I'm agreeing, they're carving out categories of life unworthy of life, basically. Useless eaters, as you put it, correctly citing history. And they're saying, okay, the sick kids, we're going to give them something to make them sicker or maybe kill them. The pregnant women, we're going to make them, give them something to maybe help them miscarry or lead them to miscarry. We're going to cull the vulnerable population, and we're going to use all these nice euphemisms, which is also historically precedented, to cover up what we're doing. I don't want to put words in your mouth, but would you speak more to that idea, if that is an accurate summary?
Yeah, in general, eugenics is targeting a group or groups of people for extermination, and it over periods of time. It goes back all the way to Sparta, so it's been here for thousands of years. This idea that some people appoint themselves as the deciders of who's going to live and who's going to die, and typically those are people in power. And the principle is, we the deciders are going to decide which categories to target. And after the Nazi Germany atrocities, it became not very vogue to espouse these ideas, even though in late 19th century and early 20th century, it was a fashionable high society attitude. If you read 19th century literature, it's all about, they always talk about good breeding, and, which is what eugenics is. It literally means good breeding.
Yes.
in Greek. All right. And so that's how they were like, well, we need to prioritize the good breeding and deprioritize the bad one. And typically these policies were designed to targeting at poor population. In the US, it was, a historically Black population and poor whites. But now, with this new iteration in 2020, it's fairly indiscriminate. It's targeted at almost everyone. And now they've figured out this new method of saying, well, this is in public health interest to protect the vulnerable by giving them these shots. But the healthy ones, and the only reason they're doing this is because they know that people who are already vaccinating. So when your child is born, they're pushed on K shot, hepatitis B shot, a bunch of other shots immediately. So in the first year of life or so, they get something like 30 injections.
Unbelievable.
Each one of them can make them sick and vulnerable and cause chronic illness. And there's like a variety of ways why that happens. So they know that people who already falling for the propaganda and for this poisoning, they're more likely to fall for the additional propaganda and poisoning. And that's why this whole pipeline is set up this way. If we can label you vulnerable, or if a mother comes into the pediatrics office, and especially young mothers, and I was there, I was like that, I fell for it. I got my child injured this way. So that's why I'm talking this way. I was stupid. I was neurotic. I trusted the white coats, and this is what happens as a new mother.
It's not. I did the same thing. I vaccinated my kids, thank God, a generation earlier when there were fewer, but I trusted the doctors. We didn't know, but please go on.
Yeah, we didn't know, but I'm telling now, young women, young mothers, anybody who's planning to have children, their grandmothers, please educate yourself. Don't be like we were. Don't be like that. Don't be neurotic. Don't trust these people. Right. Your child is born perfect. You are perfect. They don't need any injections, period. And so the thing is, they come into the office, young mothers are stressed, they don't sleep well, they're tired all the time. Easy target for the white coat to say, oh, last cold was a little too long. Oh, you had multiple ear infections in 6 months. Maybe your child is probably immunocompromised. They need extra protection.
Oh my God.
That's it, bingo, you got it.
God, my God.
This is what we need to fight against. This, because the doctors get the pediatric practices, majority of pediatric practices cannot exist without HHS payments for vaccinations. They get very large bonuses covering almost all of their overhead for the year, just from vaccinating and reaching the targets that CDC and HHS give them. That's why they're so obsessed about it.
Unbelievable. And Shanna Prejean says kickbacks for medical treatment should not be allowed in any manner, not for childhood vaccine, chemo, or treatment ordered by an oncologist or any situation at all. And that's right. And Dee Dee Tudor very wisely posts 2021, quote, "For the world at large, normalcy only returns when we've largely vaccinated the entire global population," end quote, Mr. Bill Gates, eugenist.
Yeah.
And we can see kind of more clearly with this new policy, we're going to inject the sick and we're going to inject the pregnant. Now that we know how deadly it is, the eugenic or genocidal nature of this program is clearer. I can't believe it's like a nightmare, Sasha. It's clearer under our friends, right? The people we thought would save us than even it was under the Biden regime. I mean, how do you feel as someone who, I don't know about grew up, but certainly you were born in under a totalitarian regime, right? You're familiar with that. How do you feel about the, war is peace, truth is lies, work makes free language of, we're coming to save you from the vaccine. Oh, we'll just inject your immunocompromised child with something that will destroy their immune system more. We're just going to, give your child with heart damage something that damages his or her heart even more. Talk about the euphemisms they're using.
Yeah, it's funny that you mentioned Orwell. It's like, so yeah, I did grow up under the Soviet Union. I was 2021 when the Soviet Union fell apart. So I grew up, I went to the Soviet school. I was subject to all the Soviet curriculum, Marxist brainwashing. Didn't work on me. I mean, so, but they kind of let up toward the end. So when I was in high school already, I was in chemistry class. I distinctly remember. It was my favorite chemistry teacher. She was amazing. But I already finished my work. And I was at that time, so Orwell was forbidden in the Soviet Union.
Oh, wow. That's telling.
Right? This is somewhere around 85, 86. They first published Russian translation of Orwell in a literary magazine. It wasn't a book yet. It was like a literature magazine. And so they published it there. And I was sitting in chemistry class and like on my lap and reading it.
Wow. Secretly.
And she noticed and like yelled at me.
Oh, wow. Good for you. Well, that was the beginning of an illustrious career.
Well, actually, like she yelled at me, but then she said, then she looked at what I was reading. She's like, "Oh no, keep on reading. It's a good book."
Wow. So do you recognize that obfuscation? We're going to protect the vulnerable.
Yes. And it becomes clearer. Like what I'm actually, I don't get depressed when this kind of stuff comes out, and people just, when I write an article, everybody's like, "Oh my God, this is so terrible." I don't get depressed when this stuff happens, because it's great when they reveal themselves. It's great when the enemy reveals themselves. I'm not saying everyone at HHS is the enemy, or anyone at MAGA, whatever, is the enemy. I'm saying they're getting cornered, and even if they're good people and they're trying to do good things, they're forced by their enemy, who is standing behind them, to front this lie. And these moves, these steps, reveal who is standing behind them and who is pointing the gun at them.
Yeah, I want to gently push back at that idea, because I'm hearing a lot of it. I mean, Marjorie Taylor Greene today posted with this Moderna announcement of a whole new COVID vaccine. This is not very MAGA. And I think Vigilant Fox did a thread on Marty Makary basically saying, oh, there are so many people, in HHS or in the FDA who are trying to undermine what, Noble I and Noble RFK Jr. are doing. And I just want to remind everyone, they're the bosses, like Marjorie Taylor Greene, her candidate, our president, is the boss of MAGA. He can change that policy right now if he wants to. And RFK Jr. and Marty Makary are the bosses of the people that they claim are giving them so much difficulty. You're in charge now, guys. Like, the buck stops with you. Remember that Harry Truman quote? Like, it's your problem. It's your agency. They work for you. If they're trying to undermine you, fire them, expose them or resign, and make a statement. I mean, nobody. So just gently to say, Sasha, and I know you're one of the true heroines, not getting kind of, I don't know, dazzled by the MAGA glamour the way that the other team was dazzled by the Biden glamour, such as it was. They can stop it, and no one's holding a gun to their head. Like, that's not real. It's metaphorical, right?
I do believe somebody is holding gun to their head, but let's address. So I didn't want to kind of paint everyone as the enemy. I don't want to label everyone. I have personal opinions. This is my personal opinion about individuals. Mm-hmm. So my personal opinion, Makary and Prasad must go. They are, and by the way, Makary never changed his position. He always pushed these shots on pregnant women.
Pregnant women.
Yeah.
Can I vent for a minute as a mom, Sasha? I like, so many men are holding up their syringes and saying, "Oh, come on, little lady, you may be pregnant, but we know what's best." Mm-hmm. And they're more than ever trying to inject pregnant women who are trying to carry their babies to term, have healthy babies. They're just racing after them to tackle them and put this injection in their bodies. I just want to say, as a mother, it is hard enough in a state of perfect health to successfully conceive, have a healthy zygote, have a healthy fetus, carry a baby for 9 months, not drink wine, not eat sushi that could make yourself sick or damage your fetus, avoid x-rays, like all of the things we do, carry a giant being getting bigger and bigger by the day, produce that being out of your vagina or out of, a skin infection, which is major surgery. I just want to say it for the record, and then nurse this tiny, being whose life depends on you. Or if you can't nurse, go through that journey and, stay up all night, as you note. Like, it is a grueling marathon in the best of situations to birth a healthy baby. And I'm like this, so angry and done with these men saying, "Come here, little lady, we know what's best for you with this poison injection." Like, get out of the way or help us, right? Just have the babies that our bodies were designed to have. I'm sorry, I just wanted to say that. What are your thoughts as a mother?
I completely agree. Oh, by the way, those were the same men in 19th century who were coming from autopsies to deliver babies, causing blood poisoning and deaths of maternal deaths through the roof, and would not take advice about washing their hands because they knew best.
They knew best. They knew
best. It's always like that.
Exactly. Well, this is interesting. Dee Tudor says, Makary is Johns Hopkins man, part of the Event 201 tabletop exercise for the coronavirus outbreak held October 19th, 2019 at the Pierre Hotel in New York City. Well, I know that he is a Johns Hopkins guy, and I know that Johns Hopkins is the belly of the beast, but was he actually at that Event 201 tabletop exercise? We don't know, but we definitely know that Johns Hopkins is where the whole kind of biodefense, pandemic kind of narrative got birthed from and produced and propagated. Oh my God, Sasha, this is so bad. So, and Dee says, no, he wasn't actually there. I get it, but he was he's Johns Hopkins guy.
Yeah, it's Johns Hopkins. And he always pushed these shots on pregnant women. So he didn't change his position. It's his position.
Right.
Prasad was making fun of vaccine-injured people on the podcast publicly.
No.
Of vaccine-injured people, and he called Peter McCullough an idiot. And so he's now in charge of vaccines at FDA. How perfect!
Unbelievable. Did people respond when you first broke the story of the vSafe 80% miscarriage rate a couple of years ago? How did people respond? Did it get the coverage it deserved? It should be a front page news story, of course.
I didn't get any coverage. I was very small at the time. I just started writing my stuff. Actually, I did publish this article first on Trial Site News. I was publishing there briefly. I left because I was getting, every time I would publish a paper like this, I would get a call from the editor and 4-hour discussion. And I was like, first of all, I'm doing this for free. Second of all, I'm too old for this BS. Like,
I hear you.
And so anyway, so that was first published there. Got some comments, but literally, I was getting maybe 1,000 views or 2,000 views at the time, so nothing. And of course, it didn't get coverage. The Moderna documents discussion. I went on RFK Jr.'s podcast. That was in 22. And we discussed it, broke the story there. It got some coverage at that time and some kind of like very weak fact checks and stuff like that. But again, and then it's all forgotten. And now we're here again, discussing it again.
Right. Unbelievable. We didn't stop the juggernaut, it would appear. I also remember from when my team looked at the Moderna documents that were released later than that, that they said that it was hard to get anything, as I mentioned, useful out of what they saw, but that for sure they could see that there was the same abortifacient quality to the Moderna injection as there was to the Pfizer injection. So in terms of not losing your baby, the Pfizer and Moderna choice was really a false choice, right? Did you see the same thing? Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, it's the same mechanism for all of these shots. They distribute to all the organs, including placenta, ovaries, the fetus. They will. So now there's a study showing that they destroy about 60% of female eggs, which are non-renewable, and each baby girl is born with exactly the number of eggs she's going to have. So if a woman is carrying a female baby, then her ovary is also going to get destroyed because this thing passes through the placenta.
Oh my God. So Amy Kelly found that this lipid nanoparticles pass into the testes of baby boys in utero and degrade their testes and the hormones of masculinity when they turn into adolescence. But this is the first I'm hearing that the lipid nanoparticles also pass into baby girls in utero and destroy their eggs even before they're born. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, this is how it's designed. And another thing I wanted to point out, I was also one of the few people who reviewed, actually probably also the only person who fully reviewed the Department of Defense contracts that were given to Moderna and Pfizer.
Yes.
And as you remember, Pfizer funded their own R&D.
Yes.
But Moderna received humongous amounts of money from the government since they were founded in 2011. And these Department of Defense contracts for these shots specify that Moderna must test multiple injections for reproductive toxicity. And the way it's written and the way they ran experiments and what the experiments shown, and then subsequently that the whole push into inject pregnant women at every point tells me that they were intentionally testing how many shots does it take to sterilize.
Yeah.
And I think they arrived at conclusion of somewhere between 5 and then 10. 10 would be to like fully, 100%. So now think about it. So they're pushing about 3 shots on a pregnant woman, which means that a bunch of it will go to the baby. So baby already gets like 2 or 3 before they're born. And then, up until very recently, they were pushing 3 additional shots before age of 15 months on every infant. And now they're saying on every vulnerable infant.
God.
That's the math.
And the scientific community has known since 2017 that lipid nanoparticles do traverse every membrane in the human body and do cause reproductive damage. There are studies in the NIH database. So why did people like Robert Malone use lipid nanoparticles if they knew that it would cause reproductive damage?
Well, that's a good question. I mean, I have my own opinion about Robert Malone, but I mean, I think he's a chief propagandist of this whole operation. But it's that people can have opinions about that, but the fact is, FDA was fully aware of the damage that these types of technologies can cause, and especially for reproduction.
Right.
And it's all documented. It's called regulatory knowledge, and was all documented in regulatory guidance documents that FDA publishes for all sorts of topics, including for this. And I was pointing to this also throughout 2020, 2021. There were numerous guidance documents issued by FDA for both preclinical testing and clinical testing of these classes of products, and clearly documents that these are very dangerous, various classes of risk and harm, definitely not for pregnant women. And now we come to 2020, and there's a complete 180-degree flip, as if, and then again, everybody gives them an excuse. Well, they didn't know. It's such a new technology.
Right.
But I mean, they talk out of both sides of their mouths, because depending on the situation, it's either nobody knew and it was brand new technology, or, oh no, these have been in research and development for 20 years and they're safe.
Right, exactly. It's almost as if they pull out a different version of the answer depending on the circumstance. Well, I've got you, Sasha. I want to share a couple of more little bits of information I found about the whole vSafe study. And I wrote about this in my book, The Bodies of Others. Again, I'm not a specialist like you are, but this was notable to me just as a woman. One of the things that struck me was that the vSafe platform is a phone app. So you're expected to, self-report everything that happens to you. It's not your doctor, your gynecologist, or your obstetrician reporting what happens to you. And the other thing is, if you lose your baby, and just thinking about, especially if you lose your baby quite far along in pregnancy, that's a very traumatic event. But the vSafe system set it up so that if you didn't pick up your phone app and enter, I lost my baby at 7 months or whatever, it wasn't going to register your baby as a lost baby. So that's number one. Number two, this just blew my mind. You think that the vSafe data is being processed by specialists or by researchers, but in fact, it was like a call center. There are people who were complete non-specialists, were just like minimum wage, minions were hired to just tabulate, oh, this chick lost her baby or this chick didn't lose her baby. I just found that to be extraordinary. And the last thing is that, as I recall, another way that Shimabukuro got the good outcomes that he falsely reported was he cut off the longevity of the surveillance, or the timeline of surveillance, 2 weeks after a baby is born. And a lot of problems arise for babies later than 2 weeks on. You're not going to see them at just 2 weeks of life. So those are just three things. I don't know if that's old news to you, but I thought I would share them with you while I had you.
Yeah, those are the usual tricks that they use
Really?
to show the favorable results for themselves. Another thing about vSafe, if you're dead, you're not going to report that on your cell phone, right? So
right. No, you're right. We don't know. In other words, we don't know how many women just died.
We don't know how many women died or anybody died. And another typical, I'm just reviewing, this is for future discussion. I'm reviewing, heads up everyone, a self-amplifying RNA shot is coming. It's not the most recent Moderna, but it's going to be approved. It's by Arcturus, this company called Arcturus, and their platform was already approved in Europe and in Japan. And they're currently running a study in the US using self-amplifying RNA for approval, which is expected either June or July.
Oh my God.
And I've reviewed their previous study they did in Vietnam, and it's kind of like carbon copy standard operating procedure of Pfizer trials, which is same tricks are used. A majority of patients enrolled in a central military hospital. right? The inclusion and exclusion, but this whole thing about we're going to inject everyone and then we're just going to kind of like stand back and forget that they exist. And if they call us with something, maybe we'll record it. But if they don't call us, well, we're going
So
to
it's
call
the same trick. It's like if they die and forget to call us because they're dead, party on, right?
who cares?
Right. But I mean, Sasha, this is we're kind of cynically laughing at the horror of it all, but this is not an imaginary problem because maternal deaths in childbirth are up by 40% because these lipid nanoparticles damage the placenta. Women are hemorrhaging. They're having all kinds of problems in childbirth as a result of this, right? So women could be dying, is my point, and the data won't.
The data, and they will deny it, and the data won't show it. But I've had so many experiences. I've been testifying together with really good OBGYNs who are on the side of the truth here, and they're reporting in their practices great harm from these shots, and horrible harm from the shots. Women are not being able to conceive, having miscarriages, having very, very complicated pregnancies where before, this was a rare occurrence. Now it's common occurrence. Babies are born with tumors. I had a personal experience of somebody I know. Her baby, she was vaccinated in pregnancy, and her baby developed a tumor, but it was after two. It was like several months after.
Oh my God. It's horrific. I mean, I'm just thinking about the 234 women in the Pfizer trials whose records were lost. They could all be dead. Like we don't know, or all their babies could be dead. And I'm also thinking about another nightmare thing, like you're reminding me of all the nightmares. The babies, they knew that a lot of babies would be born with a gap between their lungs and their chest wall, and it doesn't show up at birth, like right when the babies are born, but the babies get into respiratory distress after they're taken home and have to be brought back to the ER. And they knew that this would happen with this injection. So what, like in our last few minutes, what are these guys doing? What's happening politically, Sasha? How could MAGA be okaying an even more murderous version of what we just lived through?
One thing that MAGA is not honest with, and this includes all kinds of MAGA places, both in the HHS, but also in the political, the Congress and other places. Many people know about this. What they're not honest about is that COVID is a military operation, ongoing military operation. HHS is not in charge of it. HHS is just fronting it as a public health event, but it's not a public health event.
But why? I'm sorry to interrupt you. Go ahead, Sasha.
Right. So this was initiated by DARPA, specifically even before Trump, like a month before Trump made an announcement of emergency declarations and all that. Now Trump is fully on board with this operation. He knows about this. However, recently Debbie Lerman, my colleague, and I published what's called COVID dossier. So we've documented the facts about this military operation all over the world, in pretty much all regions of the world. There is evidence that this is driven by military. All the CBRN, so chemical, biological, radiological, nuclear weapons laws have been invoked. The emergency has been extended. COVID emergency has been extended now for a decade, essentially, until end of 2029.
Oh my God.
The law says that RFK Jr. has the sole authority to extend or terminate these declarations. And he knows about it very well. I've published an open letter to him. Also, it's on my Twitter profile pinned, and it's on my Substack. And the law is explicit that it's only the opinion of HHS secretary whether we have a COVID emergency or we don't have a COVID emergency. Obviously, an emergency, like a pandemic emergency that lasts 10 years is nonsense. And he knows about it. And it's not in public health interest at all to extend these declarations, because all they do is provide full liability coverage, both for manufacturers and anybody who injects anyone with these things. Right. So him not terminating it is a huge slap in all of our faces who worked very hard to get him elected, who we kind of held our nose and voted for Trump because we thought that he's going to do it, because when he was running, he fully knew it. And I've discussed this with him. There's a 2-hour podcast called Militarized Healthcare, also 2 years ago. There's no question that he doesn't know it, and he knows that it's within his authority. He has not done it. Doesn't seem like he's planning to do it. Nobody's even mentioning this.
God.
But this is what's underlying this whole MAGA is pretending stuff. We are all upset that they're not delivering on the promises. It's all underlying this whole thing about the PrEP Act Declaration, and then military CBRN laws being invoked to keep all of this in place.
Unbelievable. So my last question, I'm sure you're asked this all the time. Why would our own military make war on our own people?
Because they're not our military. That's it. They're not our military, and we're not their people. And they're not even treating their own service members as their military and their people.
Right. So whose are they? Whose are they?
Well, it's a good question. We should start, so the first thing I'm recommending is this needs to be, and by the way, all of this was also delivered on request to Senator Ron Johnson in December 2022. He organized a Zoom call, invited me, Catherine Watt, a bunch of other people, discussed this, asked us to write a memo about this. We provided the memo. We provided 600 megabytes attachment documenting every word in that memo. And so he sat on it for all this time doing hearings. I mean, I applaud his hearings and speaking on behalf of the victims. That should be done. But again, nobody's saying a word about this. And I'm recommending to declassify this.
Yeah.
Start transparency like we're promised.
Right.
And call key witnesses, starting with Colonel Matt Hepburn of DARPA.
Oh.
Who placed the phone call on February 4th, 2020, to the pharmaceutical consortium telling them COVID has been declared national security threat. Wow. So that person needs to be questioned in front of Congress about who gave him the orders to do this phone call, and what was the decision, and how was it justified that this is a national security threat?
Yeah, we have to have those answers. I'm beginning to feel like Senator Johnson is kind of the catch and kill designee for problematic information. But we need those investigations. But the people we trusted to get to the bottom of all of this and stop it seem to be the ones, opening the floodgates. Good Lord, Sasha Latypova, we've come to the end of our time. Well, I can't announce it yet because I haven't checked in with the rest of our team, but stand by for a very exciting announcement. There will be a scrappy grassroots alternative, hopefully, that you'll hear about soon. And Sasha Latypova, thank you. People in the comments are so grateful to you. And they want to know where, and I want you to tell people where can they find you. And I also want to remind people to support Sasha Latypova, support her Substack, because you get the media that you support, seriously. Go ahead, Sasha. How do people find you?
Right. So all of the stuff that I've discussed here is on my Substack. And the easiest way to navigate is you go to the pinned post, which summarizes all the key points and has links to all the key articles. I make all the key materials I make available completely free. My new articles are free. I'm grateful for support, but I also feel it's hard times, and people, whoever can support me, I'm absolutely grateful. And also I'm on Twitter. I'm publishing more on Twitter now, or X rather, and you can find me there as well.
Sasha Latypova, thank you. I mean, you're really going to stand in our history books, if they're correctly written, as a towering figure who has been on the right side of history and an advocate for women and babies and humanity this whole time. And I think your most important impact is still ahead, as important as it's been. No, I do. You're one of the few who has just, without you, I can't imagine anything that has been good would have come to light. So thank you. And everyone, remember to support DailyClout and support Outspoken if you care about interviews like this and independent reporting, and we'll continue to shine a light on what the incredible Sasha Latypova is doing in her heroic message to the world. Thank you, Sasha Latypova.
Thank you, Naomi. Yeah, I mean, I'm in awe of your work as well. So It's a mutual admiration club.
Well, it's good to have friends. Take care, Sasha, and we'll talk to you soon. Thank you so much.